So with the Oakland Athletics move to Las Vegas being practically finalized, a lot of talk has been happening in the baseball world about cities that deserve an MLB team. Everyone has their own opinions on the matter, and many want a team to come to their own city. But what I've done is I've gone through and compiled a list of, it's like somewhere around 28, 29 cities around the world that the MLB could move to. And nothing's necessarily outside of the realm of possibility. We're going to talk a lot about a lot of different cities, a little bit. And we're going to talk about why the city deserves or doesn't necessarily deserve a baseball team to call its own. Now, I'm not personally attacking any cities, any major populations of people. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm just talking about, would it be feasible to put a team in your city based on data? If you guys enjoy, leave a like down below. The last video that we did that was sports talk like this was my best performing video in like months. So I guess you guys like sports. If this one does well too, I guess we'll talk about making a sports channel specifically. We'll see how that goes. I began this list of cities by going over every city that had what I would call a Big Six team, being NFL, MLB, NBA, NHL, MLS, and Canadian Football League. I then took that list of cities and put them all into like a huge spreadsheet, which you'll see behind me right now. And then I removed every city that already had an MLB team from the list. So if it doesn't have an MLB team, it's still on this list right here. So if you're like, where's New York? It's already there. They have two baseball teams. They have two baseball teams. Now, of course, the highest number of teams in a city is New York, who has 11, but technically 10 if you include the New Jersey Devils as being like part of New York. I think they say no, but in terms of the metropolitan area, we can say, yeah, it's pretty close at least. I was looking for some outliers when I was collecting this data to see, are there any sports towns that are unique? There are none that have more than 3 teams, but also no MLB team. So there's none that are like, this is a basketball, hockey, and football town without having a baseball team in it. Because baseball is pretty widespread and it's hitting on a lot of major markets. Statistically, I was looking at a number of things to identify these towns as good fits. First, I looked at the city population as well as the metro area population. However, there's one other thing that I was looking at, which is called the combined statistical area. A CSA, combined statistical area, is a combination of adjacent metropolitan, which is called an MSA, and micropolitan statistical areas across the 50 U.S. states and territory of Puerto Rico that can demonstrate economic or social linkage. So I use these 3 things, being city pop, metro pop, and CSA, specifically just for American towns, to identify how many people we're realistically looking at for a town that is trying to attract a baseball team. I did a lot of other stat collecting that I don't think is too important. But I was just curious. I found percentage of age over 18 and 15 in other countries, because other countries keep their stats way differently. Canada doesn't calculate based on 18, they calculate based on 15. I also looked at the percentage over the age of 65, but then I also listed all major sports franchises. Is there a D1 college here, or any colleges really? Are there any major sporting events that happen in this city? And then I also looked at like the valuation and revenue for each of these franchises, and do they put money into their teams? You know, because if a city's not going to invest in their teams, then why am I going to put a team there? Finally, I made the decision to not include any town that had 0 teams from the US. And finally, it was time to start identifying some cities. So don't worry, I'm not going to read out like every statistic for every city, but I'll put their information on the screen here or here, just so you guys can see it as we're going through and as we're talking about it. And I'm going to talk about these in kind of an order. These first couple will be like the top ones, and then from there on it's just kind of like in order that I had it. So let's start with the town of Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, Charlotte is the 22nd largest metro population in the United States. It has 2.8 million residents living in it, and Charlotte has 3 Big Six teams, having the Panthers, the Hornets, and Charlotte FC, which is a new franchise to the town. There is also a baseball team already in Charlotte, which is the Charlotte Knights, which is the AAA affiliate of the White Sox. And that team has been finishing 6th in attendance for the last couple of years, like a top team in baseball for attendance, specifically 6th in 2022. Now, Charlotte does lose out on some recognition since the Hurricanes play up the road in Raleigh. And this makes it a little bit complex. We're going to talk about Raleigh in a second. Charlotte is also home to the Charlotte Motor Speedway, and it's where Haas F1 is located, has their headquarters. I think that Charlotte's a great location for a team to go eventually, because it pulls in that Carolinas demographic. On the other hand, Raleigh is like a raging sports town in its own right. So not only the Hurricanes, but two of the most fervent college sports teams in the country, being Duke and North Carolina, are within 25 miles of downtown Raleigh. So depending on where the MLB wanted to target this, I could see them choosing either one of these cities. But they are only 2.5 hours apart, so I don't know if one's necessarily better than the other. I'm sure North Carolinians would disagree. It's, do you want to make one town, 2 college, 1 hockey team, and then 3 in Charlotte? Or do you want to make it 2 and 2? MLB gets to decide that. I'm sure those 2 towns will be bidding against each other for the rights there. But it all benefits the Carolinas at the end of the day. Similarly, just a little bit down the road, in the town of Nashville, we have a very similar situation. The Memphis Grizzlies have an NBA team in Memphis, which is like way further west. And that's a little bit of an issue. But Nashville is home to the Titans, the Predators, Nashville SC, and Vanderbilt, all within 10 square miles of each other. The Nashville Sound is the minor league affiliate of the Milwaukee Brewers. First Horizon Park is in the heart of downtown. That's where they play. And they have the 3rd highest annual attendance in minor league baseball, only behind the Lehigh Valley Iron Bigs and the Columbus Clippers, neither of which are towns that even make this list. So the structure is there for the MLB to move to Nashville. They'd have to make some drastic changes to that park, but it's kind of already there, right? But at the same time, Memphis is home to the Grizzlies and is 3 hours away from Nashville. Memphis is only a tiny little bit smaller than Nashville, so I don't think there's necessarily an argument for one over the other. I guess how it kind of goes is that if you want to put 2 teams in established sports towns, you go Charlotte and Nashville. If you want to put them in new areas, you go to Raleigh and Memphis. Now here's one I've been advocating for a while, and I'm sure everyone's thought of it. It's not an original thought in the slightest, is Portland, Oregon. Now Portland is tricky. It's the 19th largest city in the United States in terms of like all the statistics. It's like 19 through 21 for all of them. But due to its location between Seattle and all the California teams, I can't tell whether or not it'll be an easy or tough draw. There's a lot of teams on the West Coast already, but if baseball is looking to expand into another West Coast state, the only other one is Oregon. Portland does have the populace. They're a relatively young city, and they already do have that sports franchise existing there, being the Trailblazers. And recently a minor league baseball team known as the Portland Pickles have sprung up, and they're very popular in the city because also they're very funny on social media. And this just kind of shows promise to me for baseball in Portland as a whole. So hopefully whatever team ends up here treats their stars better than the Blazers did Dame. Now Salt Lake City is the 22nd largest city in the US. It's fairly young, and it doesn't necessarily follow the average age of baseball fans. However, everyone knows Salt Lake City has all those colleges around it. BYU, Utah State, and Utah are all pretty close, like within an hour and a half. There's plenty of parking in the city, and there's a baseball team already present, being the Salt Lake Bees, which is the AAA affiliate, plays just south of downtown. Salt Lake could prove to be a successful venture. It's kind of in the, I don't want to call it the middle of nowhere, but it's in uncharted waters for the MLB. And for a lot of sports franchises, right? Like how many sports franchises do we have in Utah? Now, while the argument can be made that the Midwest already has too many teams, there is a glaring hole in Indianapolis. I don't get how Indianapolis doesn't have a team, considering Indianapolis has 33% of the population of Indiana. The Pirates AAA affiliate is the Indianapolis Indians, and they have the 4th highest annual attendance across all of minor league baseball. That's pretty impressive to me. It's right behind Nashville in terms of attendance records, but I think we're forgetting a very important piece of Indianapolis sports, which is the Indy 500, which is the largest racing event of the year, at least in America. Don't come at me about like Monaco or whatever. The Pacers and the Colts are already in downtown. Hockey might be a little bit of a tougher sell considering Columbus and Detroit and Chicago and St. Louis already have teams, but Indianapolis is kind of isolated And you could put a baseball team here pretty easily, I think. Indy's already a sports town. It seems wild that they don't have a team yet. Now, similarly, if you want a city with rich baseball history, there's no better city than Louisville, Kentucky. Now, I know you might be saying, Louisville, what the heck's up with Louisville? Louisville's bigger than Salt Lake City, plus it has a history of the Louisville Slugger factory. The MLB could definitely decide to play into that history a little bit and expand on like the legacy of Louisville Slugger by like placing a team in the city with a metro area population of over 1.6 million people. Now, unfortunately, Louisville's airport is like tiny and only has 24 total gates for departure and only services 11 airlines, so it doesn't necessarily have the infrastructure to be bringing in fans for a sports team. That would have to be a change that the city of Louisville makes in order to bring one in. But I don't think that Louisville's entirely out of the question to get a team if they don't give one to Nashville or Memphis. Now, you know who has the craziest fans? I'm sure you already know the answer. The answer is Buffalo. Bills Mafia are crazy. They are passionate. And they're crazy passionate. They love their teams out in Buffalo. They could not be more crazy about the Bills. I can't really speak on the Sabres. Adding a team to upstate New York, although possibly encroaching on Toronto's fan base a little bit, would definitely provide another team for this wild city to go even more nuts for. And they would have a team to call their own. I'm pretty sure Buffalo has also hosted some games for Toronto, especially like during COVID. I'm pretty sure they did that. I think they played some games out in Florida and some in Buffalo, if I'm not mistaken. But if the MLB wanted some excitement in their lives for once, then Buffalo's a great city to put a team in. Let's head down south and let's talk about the town of New Orleans. New Orleans is an interesting pick to become a sports town, but I think it makes a lot of sense. See, Greater New Orleans only has 1.5 million residents in it, and their sports franchises do rank in the bottom half of attendance every year. However, my understanding is that the fans that do go to the games are kind of fanatics, you know, like even when their teams aren't that good, they show up and they support their guys. Not everyone shows up, obviously, but the guys that do show up, they love it. I think that if New Orleans was given a chance and like a competent team, looking at you Pelicans, I think that New Orleans would support a baseball team in this being in the city. OKC's only been a sports town for about 15 years, since 2008, and the Thunder finished dead last in attendance this year, even though they weren't as bad as they have been in recent years. It's difficult to argue that OKC should get a new team in town when the team that they already have, the only one they have for that matter, already doesn't get the support. In the years that OKC was good though, like in the Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant era, they were top 15 in overall attendance. They do have two major colleges nearby Oklahoma City, being, you know, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. That's a sizable youth population that if the MLB wanted another team to be in a young city, it's not a terrible choice. I do think that it's pretty low on their list. Now, Florida already has two teams, so I don't necessarily even want to consider Florida getting a third. However, this proposed Orlando expansion, I guess, may be happening. So if that were to come through, we're going to see another team in Florida. I think that it's pretty easy to argue for Jacksonville and Orlando. Jacksonville proper is the 12th largest city in the USA, but is a smaller CSA. It's more similar to Louisville in that regard. And the Jaguars are historically a losing franchise, but the population of Jacksonville and the location in relation to Miami, Tampa, and Atlanta, it's kind of like forms like a funny little triangle, right? Of like everything. Nothing there. I don't know where Jacksonville's going to be. Here. Orlando does feel like a strange place for a team to go, but I'm sure they said that about the Magic too. I mean, the Magic have been there for 30 years, but Orlando's only the 63rd largest city in the US. Its CSA is the 15th in the US, which is kind of like a crazy difference. There's a community to support sports franchises in Orlando if given the chance. It does have the added benefit of having, you know, Disney and Universal in Orlando. So a decent amount of their tickets might be coming from tourism for people that are like, I can't spend another day riding roller coasters, but the Orlando Who's-a-Call-It's play at 3 Let's go check them out. Now look, if the MLB really wanted to be absurd, they could add a 5th team to California and put one in Sacramento. The Kings are a legitimate NBA team, it looks like. Maybe just for this 1 year. Who's to say? But maybe they look good. I like the look of the Kings. And the passion for which Kings fans have shown their team this year motivates me a lot if I'm the MLB. It shows me as a fan of sports, not even as an executive of sports. I'm not executive. It shows me that Sacramento could be a pretty fun sports town if given the chance and given, competency. The capital of California does have the 23rd largest CSA population in the United States, so they could be maybe a sleeper pick. If Vegas were to fall through, I could see them just moving up the road to Sacramento, at least for a bit. Maybe not forever, just for a bit, but I could see it happening. San Antonio would add a 3rd team to Texas, but it would technically cover like most of the largest cities in the state if we're just going to forget about El Paso for a second. San Antonio's proximity to Austin makes it not a bad option to cover both cities, and it does add a 2nd franchise to this historic sports town. It is crazy that the town that had the San Antonio Spurs never went out and got a 2nd team in their city. That's kind of crazy to me. But the Spurs are a winning franchise, and adding another team here, I think like the vibe of San Antonio is like, we're winners around here, except for right now. But now we got Wembanyama, we're going to be a good team again. I think that adding a team in San Antonio wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. That's all I have for the US. However, it's not a guarantee that the MLB chooses a city in the US. So let's look across some borders. Let's take it up north first to Canada. I think there's a bunch of options up in Canada. And by a bunch, I mean like 5. First up, obviously, is Montreal. Now, Montreal is the 2nd largest city in Canada, behind Toronto. It's the 8th largest city in North America. And it's already home to the Canadiens, the Alouettes, and CF Montreal, and is also home to the Canadian Grand Prix, which is the largest Grand Prix in North America. So there's precedent for sports here. Also, there's already been a baseball team here, being the Expos. Get on it. Baseball, go back to Montreal. If you're trying to get back in Canada, get another team up here, it's got to be Montreal number 1. Number 2, however, should be all the way in the west at Hollywood North in Vancouver. Vancouver is the 3rd largest city in Canada. It has the Canucks, Whitecaps FC, and the BC Lions representing these people in terms of sports. Vancouver is not a terrible place to settle. I would worry that it's so close to Seattle. It's not like incredibly close, but it's close enough that it's like, I don't really know. There might not be enough of a populace to share a fan base between Seattle and Vancouver. Now, there are also 5 other cities in Canada that could be possibilities: Ottawa, Quebec City, Calgary, Edmonton, and Winnipeg. 4 of these already have an NHL franchise in them, so it's entirely possible another Big 4 sport looks here. Calgary is the largest of these Midwest cities, and would be the most likely to be the pick to get Middle Canada into baseball. I think it's a tough sell to put a team in Middle Canada, especially when Calgary is a town with a population the size of Oklahoma City, and I was just criticizing Oklahoma City a minute ago. I think that these are definitely the long shots so far. But Ottawa is 5 hours away from Toronto, so it is kind of an unexplored market, and Montreal and Ottawa are 2 hours apart. Quebec is like 3 hours from Montreal. It's really tough to justify putting more than one team in Canada unless you're going to put another one in Montreal and one in Vancouver. I personally do think, though, that of the 5 that I mentioned before, Calgary probably makes the most sense because it's like a totally untapped market. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the place that the MLB's already been playing games. Let's talk about Mexico City. There have been many games over the last couple of years played at Estadio Alfredo Harpelú in Mexico City. Mexico City is the largest city in North America. There's 8 million residents in the city proper and almost 22 in the metro area. Most children in Mexico play soccer or football, if you're not American. But if the MLB really wanted to make a push into getting more kids to play their game, you gotta get more Mexican kids into baseball? With the recent success of the Mexican baseball team at the World Baseball Classic back in January and February, this is like the optimal time for them to jump in and go like, we gotta get into Mexico City. You know, like Jose Urquidy, Daewon Walker, Alex Verdugo, and historically you got like Fernando Valenzuela and Adrian Gonzalez and Vinny Castilla and Bobby Avila. there's a lot of history for Mexico in baseball. And the MLB seems like they're kind of like testing the waters a little bit. And I wish they'd just jump right into it and do it, because I think Mexico City makes a ton of sense. You've already got one up in Canada. Just put one down there. It's easy. Many people forget that Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory. I did when I was writing the script, but I think that it falls under the category of like overseas things. Baseball is the most popular sport in Puerto Rico. Organized baseball has been being played there since 1898. MLB has played games at Huron Bithorn Stadium in San Juan, and the Expos have already played games there. When the Expos were leaving in 2003 and 2004, while they were trying to move to DC, they played 22 home games there. At that stadium, at Huron Bithorn in San Juan. Puerto Rico's been home to hundreds of fantastic baseball players, like Roberto Clemente, Ivan Rodriguez, Carlos Beltran. You can't even like forget the guys that are currently playing, like Francisco Lindor and Carlos Correa. Puerto Rico deserves the utmost respect for the talent that they give the MLB. I think if the MLB were to put a team at Huron Bithorn Stadium, I think that it would be a hit. Now, when you look at the list of players from the Dominican Republic currently playing in the DR, you go, wow, that's nuts. Guys like Manny Machado, Juan Soto, Fernando Tatis, Rafael Devers, so many more. There's more than 4.5 million people living in Greater Santo Domingo, and putting a team on this little Caribbean island would be great for the DR. I don't see a reason why they couldn't put one there. I've been going at this a long time. We're going to wrap this up. I'm going to talk about 6 of the least likely cities that aren't necessarily out. Like, they're like way down on the list, but still possible. So we'll talk about them anyways. Number 1, Savannah, Cuba. I'm just going to get out of the way. Cuba and the United States have a long history of not getting along. I'm not going to speak anymore on that because that's political. However, there's a lot of MLB players from Cuba, like Jose Abreu, Jorge Soler, Luis Robert. He said how to pronounce it, I forget. Yordan Alvarez. Cuba has the second largest baseball stadium in the world, being the Estadio Latinoamericano, which holds 55,000 viewers, only being eclipsed by Dodger Stadium. The Cuban national team has played in the World Baseball Classics in recent years, and they even played against the Orioles in an exhibition game back in '99. I think politics would get in the way of this ever really happening. I don't think the US would let the MLB go through with this. But I think that Havana is a pretty good place to put a baseball team, right? Can we just get past the politics and just be fans of baseball? Now, we are going to talk about London, of course. Of all the cities in Europe that get a team, it's the easiest to just put one in London. Organizations in England have shown time and time again that they are most certainly willing to dump millions of dollars into sports, specifically football. And I get it, right? Football's huge over in there. Like their version of football, not American football. And while I'm not expecting a number like Manchester United's $5.95 billion to be dumped into a baseball team on an expansion, I'm kind of thinking that there might be someone willing to invest a little bit. Like probably John Henry, the owner of the Red Sox, might be willing to do it, considering he also owns Liverpool. Just saying. Sell the team, John Henry. The MLB has played a handful of games over in London just to test the waters, and I'm sure nothing's ever really going to come of it for London because that's really far to travel. The exposure that it's receiving over in Great Britain is definitely intriguing. I definitely feel less confident in Paris getting a team, but they are hosting a game in the World Tour in 2025, so we'll see how that goes. Japan. Baseball is huge in Japan. It's gigantic. The biggest star in the MLB is from Japan. The Nippon Professional Baseball League is huge. Tokyo does have 2 teams, being the Giants and the Yakult Swallows, and these games are nuts. They're insane. MLB has held games at the Tokyo Dome before. I do think there might be a better location than where the Giants play. If you're unfamiliar with Koshien, which is the annual high school baseball tournament held in Nishinomiya, which is over in Osaka. This stadium holds 55,000 people, just like the one in Cuba. And it was built specifically for high school baseball tournaments, and they pack the house.
本当にメジャーリーグで言ったらワールドシリーズみたいな場所なので
These two stadiums, being where the Giants play and Koshien, would be great places for the MLB to put a team in Asia. However, I don't know if Japan would go for it, just because how big NPB already is. The MLB recently announced that the Dodgers and Padres are going to be playing a series in Seoul. Seoul is one of the larger cities in Asia. South Korea is definitely an interesting selection for the event. The game's going to be the first regular season game played in Korea and the first MLB game played there since 1922. Korea also typically does pretty well in the World Baseball Classic, so it's not the worst thing I've ever seen, you know? Finally, and we have to mention it. We got to put a team in China. Where in China? Is it Beijing? Is it Shanghai? I think it's Shanghai personally. That's a city with a population of 26.3 million people. The MLB already does have a streaming deal with Tencent, who I guess they also made Pokemon Go, but I guess they're just a giant tech company. They control a lot of stuff in China, but they stream 125 games a year in multiple Asian countries, including Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and that deal expires at the end of this year. It's been in place since 2018, and they haven't really said if it's going to be renewed or not. At least as far as I've seen, I haven't seen anything about this being revived. It's not impossible that the MLB would throw some money at the Chinese market. It's not impossible. What can I say? So let me know, what city do you want to see receive an MLB team? Let me know down in the comment section below. Also, let me know if you want more sports content on the channel, because I like talking about sports and I have a bunch of things written out that I just haven't even considered posting or making videos yet. This is one of them. So if you want more sports content, let me know. With that being said, my name is Ethan. This is Hardcap Games / Hardcap Sports, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.